All right, it is again so encouraging to see so many of you come back and be a part of this class. This is session 4, and if you were here at the beginning, I gave you, at the first session, I gave you a mom and pop quiz, and you don't have to pull it out, I'll read it to you, but some of you maybe have already gone through this. Question number 1, the statement wall of separation between church and state is found in which of the following documents? A, the Declaration of Independence, B, the Bible, C, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, D, a letter from President Thomas Jefferson to Baptists, or E, I don't know. Which is it? Am I hearing a D? D as in dog? Yes, that's where it's at. It was actually that phrase wasn't generated uniquely from Thomas Jefferson. It had been used by several other people, but in terms of the documents that we have in the Library of Congress and this type of thing, here's what in general, and by the way, I printed out an article for you to take and read. This gives you not only the letters I'm going to reference, but the background. It's a very good essay. But here's the picture of it. So the colonies have become states, and they've declared their Declaration of Independence. And in Connecticut, there was a state church. All right? And by state church, it was congregational in doctrine and in formation. But by state church, we mean this, that taxpayers in Connecticut paid basically for those pastors, those shepherds of the congregational church. And as we recalcitrant Baptists came over from England and started wanting to have a distinction there, the Baptists wrote President Thomas Jefferson, not that they understood his office to be able to rule over Connecticut, but what were they doing? They wanted other people to be aware of people in leadership. Wait a minute, right? Wait a minute. We want this to be fair, all right? And so Thomas Jefferson wrote back to the Baptists. By the way, I've printed the letters, both the letters from the Danbury Association of Baptists. There were about 26 Baptist churches associating together there in Connecticut. Their letter is so gracious, so honoring to the President Jefferson, and but basically saying, wait a minute, as we go on as a new nation, this needs to be addressed, all right? And so it is in his response back to them that Jefferson uses that statement, wall of separation and state, all right? So again, you can read it. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but you can take that and have that memorized by Tuesday night. Well, last week we considered the Bible's claim that Christ is over all earthly powers and authorities. From Ephesians 1, we looked at that, verses 20 through 23, and of course, where many Christians are very familiar with what we call the Great Commission. The Great Commission does not start with what? Go. The Great Commission starts with Jesus saying, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples. All right? If you leave out on whose authority, you really have cut off the immense statement that Jesus makes and the reason why we can and must do this. Why? Because the one having been given all authority in heaven and earth has commissioned his people to do this. All right? You hear the difference? It's not, if you feel so led. No, this is an order. All right, it's a commission in that sense. So we looked at that, and this is a bedrock truth that Christ's church is to operate by and proclaim to all men. Jesus is Lord. All right, Christ is over all. And so we also understand, this is what we looked at last week, that his supreme sovereignty, under his supreme sovereignty, there are three earthly spheres of sovereignty: the family, the church, and the state. Each of these is to have its own governing system. And as the message of Christ has spread around the globe these past 2,000 years, that way of understanding and operating has taken root among the nations. I gave you the illustration of John Peyton going to the cannibals in the New Hebrides Islands. Not trying to be funny, but when you think about cannibalism, it's easy to giggle. Folks, they stopped eating each other. They started having a high view of human life, right? They stopped their immoral practice of the chief divvying up the women as he pleases, right? They came into practicing, wait a minute, there's a husband and a wife. That husband's the head. The wife is his helpmate. She submits to him. The parents are over the children, right? The chief doesn't dictate all those details. No, there's a family unit there, all right? Which would also lead to, well, how does the chief operate in that tribal group now? Well, now he's probably going to convene a council and say, hey, how do we as a group think about this situation? That tribal group over there is threatening us. How do we respond? You see what's going on? And so now the chief himself comes under the authority of Christ. How they worship. Remember how we talked about every tribal group has a belief system, right? That's what culture is at its root, right? Well, how's that going to change? You see, that's how the gospel spreads and how it takes root, okay? And what it begins to look like. So that's what we looked at last week. Well, this morning we're going to look at how the relationship between the church and the state has been understood historically and how these understandings are seen today. And I need to tell you this as clearly as I can. I am relying heavily on an essay, a long essay written by Dr. Andrew Naselli from Bethlehem College and Seminary. That's up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're familiar with the name John Piper, when he was pastor at Bethlehem Baptist Church, he started this Bible college and seminary. And Dr. Naselli has put together what's called a spectrum. Oops, a spectrum. So if you can see my little blue arrow down here, it's what we might call a scale, okay? And this is how people view and practice the relationship between religion and church and the state. Once again, you'll see why I'm using that word religion in just a minute. But if you start over on the left, this is where we will start when I start walking through this. There's no religion, only what? The state, okay? And we'll say more about that in just a minute. But then 7 steps later, you really have no distinction between religion and the state, okay? And again, we'll give you examples of that. But just to be review, you have these in previous notes from session 2, but just defining our terms. When we talk about the church, we're talking about the public institution formed by the beliefs, the principles, the practices, and ceremonies that Jesus Christ has commanded us to practice, to believe in principles and practices. And so in that so doing, we represent Jesus the Christ here on earth. And as I said before today, the public institution that identifies itself as representing Jesus here on earth is significantly divided and fractured. One of the reasons it is divided is due to different convictions as to the church's relationship to the state. All right, that's one of the reasons we are divided. Okay, so that's what we mean by the church. When we talk about religion, the way I'm using it here in this class, an organized set of beliefs, principles, ceremonies, and rituals which make up the whole. So Islam has a set of beliefs and ceremonies. Hinduism is a religion because it has a set of beliefs and ceremonies. Okay, and Christianity, or the church, many times those words are used synonymously. They refer to it's a religion in the sense of having specific beliefs, principles, and rituals. All right. When we talk about the state, we're talking about the governing system that regulates a society and the population within a specific territory. The governing system that regulates a society and the population within a specific territory. All right, here we go. So remember that spectrum, that scale. Where we're going to start is over on the left with secular suppression. The secular government suppresses religion. So the government and religion should be totally separate in the sense that the government should be secular because God does not exist. The government should not merely separate from religion, but should actually suppress religion. A militantly atheistic government does not consider its belief system to be a religion. You hear that? A militantly atheist government does not consider its belief system to be a religion. We talked about that last week, how secularism, we would argue from our Christian perspective in the Bible that no, secularism is a religion. But the secularists, because they deny God, they deny then that they are a religion. Historic example, Karl Marx. All right. Modern examples, the former Soviet Union, Marxist-Leninist atheism, North Korea, which is officially an atheist government. And again, this is all Naselli. He would put into that category secular progressivism. That may not be a familiar term, but it's what we're seeing here in Western civilization here in the United States. All right. So the idea of I'm a secularist, I don't believe there is a God, or I'm indifferent to the existence of a God, and I am secular in that sense. I deny any supernatural. All there is the material universe. And in that realm, we need to progress away from your stupid superstitions about God. They're progressing somewhere. All right? Well, where are they progressing? To man and only man and what he determines is reality. So that's what is meant by secular progressivism. So in this view, the government protects itself from being contaminated by religion. We are able to get some reports out of North Korea on occasion. And what is going on in North Korea? That is an atheistic country, right? And there are, as best we understand, there are a few believers there, but very few, and it's virtually impossible for them to be organized into any visible body of believers, like a local church. Okay. View number 2. If I'll just stop right there for a minute. Any questions about that first view? Yes, Steve.
If the government could tax religions, like we have tax exempt status, would they more likely, because they're deriving income and they're for control and power from the churches, how would their view change, do you think? Or is that too abstract of a question?
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that because I haven't really thought that through. Yeah, I don't know how to think that through, but it's the only way I have thought it through is, and I think I mentioned this from the pulpit a few months ago or within a group of people, I have to wonder with the economic financial status of our nation and seeing all the nonprofit property out there, that there's going to be some type of a connection. If you want to retain your nonprofit status, you have to assimilate to holding to the LGBTQ diversity, that type of thing. I could see that happening. I know a lot of like Bible colleges and seminaries are having to think that through because they receive, they get students who are using student loans, federal grants, all this type of thing. I have to wonder if that's coming down the pike. All right. View number 2 is religious separation. Religion must radically separate from the government. So in here you see religion keep away from the government. All right? And that's not the right, I don't think that's the right one here. We'll see what we get with the next one. I may have those messed up. So in view 2, the government and religion should be totally separate. Yeah, I think what this should be is actually keep away from a particular religion. The government and religion should be totally separate in the sense they are distinct spheres that must not overlap because the government is worldly. Consequently, individual Christians must separate from the government by not wielding the sword as combatants or as magistrates. In other words, Christians would not run for any position in government. They must not wield the sword as combatants or as magistrates because to do so would be to cooperate with a sinful institution. So this view yeah, I apologize. This is, no, that's right. This is right. This is right. Okay. All right. This view historically has been held by what are called Anabaptists. Okay. So Anabaptists are not ladies named Anna with a 9x13 casserole pan. Anna means again. All right, and so 500 years ago with the Reformation, there's this whole separation and from the Roman Catholicism. However, infant baptism was still practiced by a number of the people in the Reformation. All right, and the Anabaptist movement came to see no, it must be baptism by immersion, and so therefore all those who were still had been already baptized as infants needed to be what? Baptized again. That's where the phrase comes from. And that was largely in Europe. Switzerland area, some in the German area, Russia. You see that take root in Europe. And today, the traditional Mennonites would hold this view. Your Amish would be more in this category, okay? And so that's the idea. So again, keep away from the government is the idea here. So notice in these first 2 views we have seen, we see hostility between earthly government and religion. All right? So one side, the first one says what? Ixnay on religion. The government, the state says no religion, right? The other one, no, we need to be able to obey God. We're staying away from government and just do our own thing. So government's bad. All right? All right. View 3 is we now coming to religious neutrality. And the government must be religiously neutral. So you can see in your little graph on your sheet, the little guy is doing, the ninja guy is doing keep away from a particular religion. There is this wall of separation. So this view envisions neutrality with no intermingling. The government and religion should be separate in the sense that the government should be religiously neutral, and you're going to have to, and particular religions should not influence the government. The government may be religiously neutral in one of two ways. One, by promoting no religion, that is a pluralistic secularism that does not necessarily deny God's existence, but wants to keep the peace between opposing religions. Or, two, by promoting a civil religion, which is a set of practices and symbols and beliefs distinct from traditional religion, yet providing a universal values paradigm around which the citizenry can unite. But either way, the public square should be religiously neutral. Religious people should publicly argue based on natural law and not their particular religion. So I'd encourage you to take this and chew on this throughout the week. But here are some historic examples. What has come to be known as classical liberalism. If you're familiar with the name John Locke, he had a massive influence on the founders of our country. All right, John Stuart Mill likewise. Emphasis on a free market. And Naselli writes, to some degree, America had a Protestant civil religion until the 1950s. In my opinion, that's a fair evaluation. All right. Another group or belief system that's tied with this idea of religious neutrality is libertarianism, emphasis on individual autonomy. And then finally, Naselli says progressive liberalism, emphasis on the welfare state and freedom from traditional sexual ethics. Okay? So the government must be religiously neutral. View number 4, heading down to the right on the scale. This view, religious influence. So prior, we had religious neutrality. Now we have religious influence on the state. All right? So the government should not promote only one particular religion. Yet, religion may influence the government within limited parameters. So here's the position. The government and the church are separate in the sense they have distinct God-authorized jurisdictions. God authorizes the government to wield the sword, which a government may justly do against an individual Christian who has broken the law. Naselli puts that in because that's important, right? Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you're absolved from the civil code and breaking it, all right? So God authorizes the government to wield the sword. And God authorizes the church to exercise the keys. What's he referring to there? Remember how Jesus speaks that way? You have the keys of the kingdom of heaven. In other words, another way to put it is the earthly government has a real sword, right? They can punish people to the point of death, right? The church, on the other hand, has the sword of the Lord, which is the word of God. Follow that? Okay. And we have, our duty is what? To point people to Christ, to point people to eternal life, right? Whereas earthly government has to do with what's going on here in the visible realm within that society. That's kind of the idea here. The government, again, Naselli makes an important point here. So God authorizes the church to exercise the keys, which a church may rightly do by refusing to affirm that an individual person with government authority is a Christian. Think about that. So we may recognize someone as having earthly authority over us, but we do not recognize them as what? Right with God. Okay? Just because they are in earthly authority over us does not give them an in. And the church has the duty and the right to say that. Okay? The government should not exclusively promote a particular religion. That is, the government recognizes religious freedom and does not institute a state church or spread doctrine that is explicitly Christian. And the government should not restrict the spread of false religions, or false religious beliefs. That is, the government should not refuse to allow a mosque to be built in the town square. But religion may influence the government. An individual governmental authority, like a United States senator, may argue for a political position based on religion, and the government may adopt that position, but not on the basis of religion. The public square cannot be religiously neutral. Rather, it's a religious battleground. For Christians, the church's mission is to make disciples. Individual Christians should significantly influence the government, and the government should not institutionalize Christianity. That is, the government should not put the Apostles' Creed in the Constitution. You following so far? Is this making some sense? Well, guess who holds this position historically? Baptists. All right? So if I didn't bring my copy up here, but you would see this way of seeing the distinctions between the church and the state and the relationship in the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, the 1689 confession. All right? Other groups, English nonconformists, if you know your church history, separatists, such as Congregationalists and Quakers. Notice some of the modern examples. Some of you will recognize these names: Wayne Grudem, Jonathan Lehman, John Piper, Andrew Walker, Scott Aniol. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah. He spoke at our Grace Alone Colorado conference 2 years ago. All right. All right. So this has been historically, not every Baptist. We are an independent lot. But by and large, this is what's been argued for historically. All right. If I could use a word, I find it helpful. Many Baptists are saying, well, we can deal with the competition because we have a better gospel. So we'll compete with the mosques. We'll compete with that. All right. That's again a way to consider that. All right. All right. Any questions, comments? Anna, do you have your 9x13 casserole pan? You're not even laughing, Carol. All right, view number 5, Christian government. The government and religion overlap. And Naselli writes, by labeling view 5 as Christian government, he says, I am using the specific adjective Christian instead of the more general adjective religion or religious, because this view is peculiar to Protestant Christianity. So what's the position? The government and the Christian church are two God-ordained institutions that have distinct and overlapping God-authorized jurisdictions. And they should work together under God's ultimate authority. For Christians, the church's mission is to make disciples of all the nations. Individual Christians should significantly influence the government, and the government may institutionalize Christianity to some degree. That is, by putting God in the Constitution and by having a religious test for office. The government should identify as a Christian government in the sense that the laws and customs it promotes derive from the ultimate authority of God. The governing authorities should know that they are accountable to God for how they rule, referencing Daniel 4:26. And it is fitting for the government to exhort citizens to fear the living God, Daniel 6:26. The government should pursue justice by promoting the natural law, which the Ten Commandments summarize, as much as prudently possible. The government should, along with the church and society, help create cultural conditions conducive for conversion and for the common good. While the government should promote and to some degree enforce a just social order based on a right understanding of God and man, that is, the government should promote marriage and the family and demote no-fault divorce, adultery, homosexuality, transgenderism, and pornography. The government should not force citizens to follow Christianity, since only the Spirit's regeneration produces a heart change. The church's weapon is not the sword, but instead the word, water, bread, and wine. This model is not feasible long-term if many of the citizens are not genuine Christians. Historic examples. Magisterial reformers. By magisterial, it means these people were the best known. They had some of the most weighty significance in the Reformation. Martin Luther, John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, John Knox. The Reformed Scholastics, the Church of England. John Gill, he was a Baptist. American Puritans, he gives the name, including Jonathan Edwards. And this was the basic approach in various colonies and states at the time of America's founding. Modern examples. Two men who are playing a major role in this right now are Doug Wilson from out in Moscow, Idaho, and a Baptist by the name of Joe Rigney. He was actually president of Bethlehem Baptist Seminary in Minneapolis, and he just left that. All right. Now here comes the hot potato, Christian nationalism. Have you heard that phrase in the last couple of years? All right. So this would be, again, you have to realize that phrase, Christian nationalism, it is all over the page as to what it means, from whose lips it's coming from. All right. Be very careful about being dismissive of it, as well as just embracing, oh yeah. I'll try and talk more about it next week. But I think you can see, if you think through what's being said here with View 5, you can kind of see why that phrase fits this. No, we're a Christian nation, right? And the state, the government, should honor primarily the Christian religion, okay? But again, I've listened enough to Doug Wilson and Joe Rigney, at least I think I could fairly speak for them. That last phrase in this model is not feasible long term if what? Many of the citizens are not genuine Christian. Doesn't work, okay? But folks, you can see, if I can go off script for just a little bit here, you can see the degree that our nation has gone so godless and anti-Christ. This sounds radical, right? This, oh, it's terrible. That's terrible. Well, stop and think about it. It's where we started with the colonies and the original states, right? You see what's going on? So, oh, that's just terrible. I can't be a Christian nationalist. They just want, well, wait a minute. what does it mean? You see, so I'm very cautiously encouraged, if that makes sense, by some of these things and some of these stands that some of these people are taking. So again, can't agree with everything hook, line, and sinker, but the premise is not ungodly. It might be unrealistic, but it's not ungodly. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or responses to that? So in this view, I think you have there in your notes, the government enforces a particular ethic that is tied to Christianity, is tied to a religion. All right? All right, view 6. So here we have religion over government. So religion governs the government and directs the government to enforce religion. Position: a particular religion governs the government and directs the government to enforce that religion. Some call this view the doctrine of the two swords, in which the sword of religion trumps the sword of the government. In medieval Roman Catholicism, both swords belonged to the Pope. And the Pope directly wielded the spiritual sword and indirectly wielded the temporal sword by commanding government authorities. So in this view, God ordains the government to ensure peace in society, which includes to some extent governing church assemblies, ensuring that the church maintains orthodoxy, and punishing people who refuse to comply. The magistrate might say, the Pope is telling me that John Doe is a heretic. So what? The government must what? Punish him. All right? And the historic example of this is medieval Roman Catholicism. All right? You have to remember that the Holy Roman Empire stopped being holy when it got started, but stopped being an empire centuries ago. But prior to the Reformation, prior to that 1400s and 1500s, this is when that's talking about it, is that there was really this union between local nation states and the Holy Roman See out of Rome, and the Pope controlled those kings, those local kings. All right, so that's a historic example. I don't think you have this in your notes. Naselli says, I don't know what to give as a good modern example. Yes?
I don't know what would be a good modern example from Christianity, but I think there's a lot of examples from Islam.
Yeah, I was going to say Islam.
Hold on to number 7. We're coming to number 7. Okay?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I read ahead to number 7, but if you think of one country in particular in the Middle East, that a religious leader is the supreme leader of the government, then wouldn't that be religion over government?
Yeah, if you'll bear with me, let's get to 7, and I think you'll see a few distinctions here. They're not super significant, but you're in the other ditch already, and you're sliding down the hill to number 7. So, all right. So both views 6 and 7, which we've yet to come to number 7, are a single unified polity with two distinct authorities, government and religion. In view 6, it's religion over government. All right? But now, let's go to number 7. And you'll see why he uses the word religion, because this isn't Christianity. Okay? So government over religion. The government governs and enforces religion. So this position, the government governs religion with a state church, that's used loosely, and forces citizens to follow or at least to not oppose a particular religion. In a sense, the distinction here between government and religion breaks down in that the government is a political religion. And so government and religion are integrated. Okay? And so then Naselli gives some historic examples. Think of ancient Egypt, when Pharaoh was oppressing God's people prior to the Exodus. The Pharaoh was God. All right? The Roman emperor worship that developed, it was just kind of taking off at the time of Jesus, shortly before that, and then it became very strong in the last part of the first century and into the second century. That whole thing of Caesar is Lord, you have to take a pinch of incense, and offer it up at a public altar and say what? Caesar is Lord. He's a god. He's divine. All right? So you see it there in the Roman emperor worship. Possibly Constantine, that's debatable, and I appreciate Naselli's willingness to say that. He references Erastianism, which I'm not familiar with, but Henry VIII. But the most evident one would be Islam, when it is a nation's dominant religion. And in that case, you have the modern examples of Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. Okay? So just a couple of comments to close, and if you have questions, I'll try and answer them. By the way, if you are interested in this essay that Naselli writes, I can send it to you in one of two forms or both forms. Number one, it's a long read, but it does have pictures. That helps this guy. So you can read it. It's also in a podcast where Naselli actually reads this. And I have listened to it probably half a dozen times and watched the pictures as I listened. It's really good, really good. There is an organization called ChristOverAll, ChristOverAll.com. You can find these things. And it's a group of pastors, Baptists for the most part. Man, are they good thinkers, in my opinion. They provide so much. But they interviewed Doug Wilson, Scott Aniol, I think maybe John Piper, on their views of the relationship between the church and the state. And then Naselli took all those interviews and, using what those men said, also with obviously more information, put together this spectrum. But if you're interested in that, let me know and I'll be glad to get those links to you. But just one other comment, and then I'll open up to you and we'll be done. Do you get some sense of, oh, wait a minute, I've never thought about this. I do need to think through this, and how does the church relate to the state? Is this opening up your eyes, if I may ask? Is it causing you to think maybe a little bit more precisely, or maybe some of you've I've had this figured out since I was weaned. Cindy?
Well, I think we saw it more with COVID hitting us because of the government shutting down.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that leads me to one other comment. What we have seen in so much of what we would call Bible-believing evangelicalism here in the United States, you can't get around it. We have had it so easy. We have had it so easy. But it's kind of like that frog in the kettle. Things have been heating up, and we really are kind of having to respond. Wait a minute, where is this going? And in my experience and my way of thinking, as well as what I'm reading, so many of us, and I'm including myself in it, when you hear some of these pastors and leaders taking these strong, bold stands, That's politics. Okay? We're not supposed to be involved in politics. Well, wait a minute. Christ is over all. You see the issues? So yes, there are debates as to methodology, but for these men, I've come to thank the Lord for many of these men who are writing and podcasting and standing in the Missouri State Capitol, preaching these types of things. Man, I'm thanking the Lord for them because we have reached such a point in our own situation that we must, and from my perspective, we must show the next generation, no, we actually believed Christ is over all. Yes, Sandy.
So, with this being such a shift, where do you think we're gonna go in this paradigm? Where do you think, would it be the government over religion?
I think it would be far more, let's see, let me get back to, I think there's going to be a hostility, a more pronounced hostility. I wonder if that's going to happen between the government and religion. I would be cautious in saying we're going to become the next North Korea. Again, the Lord is sovereign, but I think we're going to see that far more. The other comment, I don't know if this is totally applicable, but it is my conviction that this is not first an issue of what's going on in Washington, D.C. This is first an issue of what's going on in individual homes and, sadly, even churches. There has been in churches, there has been such a lightness to the holiness of God. There's been such a easy believism type of mindset. How can we be salt and light when we have the same desires and interests and habits as the world around us? Now, some people put all the blame on the church. I'm careful with that because my understanding of the scriptures is you will always see the wheat and the tares together in the church. The church can never be a pure influence on the world around it. Having said that, I think we're experiencing the shallowness of the American religion. We're paying for it. And in that sense, it's a judgment. As Peter says in 1 Peter, judgment that comes upon the household of God, first comes upon the household of God. And I think in some way we're seeing that. Where that goes, again, I'm not denying that God could do this, but we're a nation of close to 340 million people, somewhere right around there. Folks, if you are going to see significant change into a high view of marriage, a high view of the sanctity of life, right? What are you going to have to see? You're going to have to see virtually 130 million adults turn in faith, repentance, and faith to Christ. That's the way I see it. Again, I'm not telling God what he can and cannot do. But because of the nature of our governing system, right? And to where it's drifted, I think if we are going to see any significant change, it's going to have to be massive, what we might call instantaneous regeneration of millions of people. I can't see how it's going to drastically improve in my generation unless God would do something like that. But, just a minute. But God is not guaranteed to work in my time frame. right? He may use and save all his people that he's going to save through a mess of our nation, right? And 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, you're going to see this nation that is just glorifying God, right? I don't know. Maybe the rapture will occur before that. So, Steve.
Yeah, just real quick, a comment and a question. When I was growing up in the, however you want to define that, the United States was called a melting pot. We were all kind of in the same thing. We all kind of had similar goals and aspirations and values. Now it's more like a beef stew. We're all different. And to borrow a term from the Bible, we're very unequally yoked in this country. There's no unity. And so that kind of reflects back on what you're saying. How do we get back, or do we ever get back to a unified melting pot sort of thing when you have so many different, call them what you want, nationalities,
Right.
points of view? And then the question is, you don't even have to comment on that unless you want to. What kind of government do you think Great Britain is? It has a king, and then they also have a parliament and have.
It's called a constitutional monarchy. And so they do have that figurehead of the majesty, the king or the queen, and that line. And so they have a figurehead, but their monarchy ultimately is under the Constitution. So in other words, I think I use this as an illustration. When Parliament passes a law, they bring it to King Charles and say, "Oh, King Charles, live forever. Cute grandkids. Here's the law. We want your blessing on it, but we're going to do it anyway." But it's a ceremonial type of thing. Jim.
If I could backtrack just a bit to view number 6, where it says, "I'm not sure what to suggest as a good modern example." Just some preliminary